To cut through the noise on the internet, that's what you need to do. And so I lean into that. A lot of people kind of are like, oh, the stuff is like too on the nose or whatever. 100%. I totally get that. It's on the nose because I know I have like 2 seconds to make an impression on you.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. In art right now, it's hard to avoid talking about Beeple. That's the artist name of Charleston-based Mike Winkelmann, known to millions of followers for digital images that he makes and posts daily. These give off a sense of a brain ODing on memes. We're talking pictures of giant emojis and pop culture junk being worshipped in dystopian techno hellscapes, or melted versions of celebrities and politicians turned into grotesque monsters and killer robots. Beeple first burst into the center of the art world conversation in March 2021 with the sale of his work called Everydays, the first 5,000 days, at Christie's auction house. Sold as an NFT, it was essentially a high-resolution digital image that compiled everything he had made in his first decade plus of daily posting. It sold for a shocking $69 million, still one of the biggest prices ever for a work by a living artist. And it made Beeple a symbol both of the new respect and opportunity for digital artists and of critics' worst fears about a blockchain-fueled art bubble and the meltdown of taste. While that digital art bubble did crash, Beeple survived and experimented with new media. One of his interactive video sculptures has only just closed at LACMA in Los Angeles, while a set of robot dogs with human heads that he created was the talk of the recent Art Basel Miami Beach Art Fair in December. His work inspires a lot of commentary, positive and negative, including from me. I've written both. But for sure, his influence seems to be growing as both museums and galleries look to try to figure out how to court digital natives. Beeple, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Where are you joining me from?
Yeah, so I am at Beeple Studios here in Charleston, South Carolina, and we opened this in March 2023, and so we're almost coming up on 3 years here. And this is where all the sculptural pieces, the dogs that we just had at Basel, and this is where I do all the work and all the team is here. And then we also have a bunch of different events and things here as well.
Oh, yeah, I want to talk to you about all that, but I should say, I don't think most people need an introduction to you. You are probably one of the most famous artists working right now. But for people who don't know and might be wondering, what is a Beeple? Where does the name come from?
So it's actually a stuffed animal toy from the 80s. And it kind of giggles and makes noise when you block its eyes. And so it kind of has this sort of mix of sound and light that it reacts to. And a lot of the very early work that I did was very much about sort of precise syncing of audio and video. And so that's was sort of the impetus. And part of the other sort of impetus for choosing a name, which I've had for 23 years now, is that I came up more through the graphic design, motion design, web design field, and everybody had pseudonyms that they had online.
Sort of like street art, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that history because I feel like my friends who follow electronic music and that kind of scene knew about you a long time before people in the museum world knew about you. I was poking around and I feel like the first big article I can find about you is actually from 2011, an interview with you in The Atlantic, where they're talking about you as a creative inspiration because of your everyday art project. So since that's how you rocketed to fame a couple of years ago, how did you get into everyday art?
I had already been making art. I've been making art since 1999. I'm 44, since I got to college. And so I'd already been making art for about 8 years, sort of quite a lot of short films and all different sort of stuff over that time. But I had saw a illustrator out of the UK named Tom Judd who did a sketch a day. And I thought that was a great idea, to get better at drawing. And so I wanted to get better at drawing. I wanted to just sort of improve my technical skills. And so that's what I started doing a picture a day. And then after that, I was still very, very bad at drawing, but it taught me a lot. I'd always wanted to use a sort of 3D program. And so I was like, well, why don't I try and use this technique to teach myself a 3D program, Cinema 4D. And so then I just kind of kept doing it. And now here we are coming up on 20 years. And so, yeah, it's been a ride.
By the time you took off, became this symbol of the NFT moment, you already had millions and millions of followers on social media. Was that like a linear growth, or was there a moment that you went particularly viral?
No, it was really sort of like linear. You had mentioned the sort of like electronic music people knowing me. I had done a number of things that had kind of like brought in that audience over that time. One was releasing these Creative Commons VJ clips, which I did for about 10 years. And so those became very popular in the concert visual world. Then led me to doing commercial work, eventually for the Super Bowl and Justin Bieber and people like that. So there's a lot of people in the concert visual electronic art world that came to my work through that. Then obviously the Everyday is releasing that through a bunch of different sort of like platforms, gain an audience. And then the other thing was I would release the project files for the short films and videos that I made, which was not really done at the time, but it brought in a lot of people who were able to sort of like learn from my work and then use it, and they could remix it and all this stuff. They didn't have to credit me. People could use it for commercial work. And so those things kind of just slowly built that audience over 20 years.
I feel like you do have a very distinctive aesthetic. If you go back to the Everydays, you'd notice various epochs of the Beeple style. But by the time you became famous, you had a pretty distinctive style, which basically your subject is what I'd say is brainrot before that term took off. And I guess now you're working with AI. And before we go any further, I did want to just pick your brain about the slop moment, because you're making stuff every day. And then there's this new kind of cultural wave that's overtaken us of people using AI to pump out brain-rotted stuff. How do you relate to that?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think the term brain rot, I don't really know what it means necessarily. Like, it's one of those things where it's like when you see it, you kind of like know. But I think it very much speaks to the time. And this is a very conscious choice that I've made with my artwork, is to make something that is very visceral, because I think to cut through the noise on the internet, that's what you need to do. And so I lean into that. A lot of people kind of are like, oh, the stuff is like too on the nose or whatever. 100%. I totally get that. It's on the nose because I know I have like 2 seconds to make an impression on you. And so I could make things that have all this nuance and blah, blah, blah. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but to me, I'd rather try and grab your attention. And the way you grab people's attention is through making things that immediately have a very strong visual component to it. And that's why you'll see, like, a lot of times I use heads that are really big. I know that you're going to look at this on a 5-inch screen. And if I put the head really small in the background, there's a high chance you won't even see it at all. And so there's a lot of considerations that I'm taking into account to maximize how many people are able to see and engage with this work based on the medium that we all see things most through, which is social media.
So your general process, how do you decide what to respond to, whether it's politics or technology? What kind of guides you?
What kind of guides me is trying to lately, and again, this has changed many sort of like times over the course of the Everydays. With regard to the other projects, they're obviously thought out over months or years or whatever. But with regard to the Everydays, I'm trying to speak often about whatever people are speaking about the most, which is actually kind of getting harder and harder to determine, because you get into these internet sort of like echo chambers, and then you're kind of like, is everybody talking about this, or am I just seeing a bunch of stuff about it because I've looked at a post about it and now the algorithm's like, oh, you're interested in that? Okay, let me shove a bunch of that shit down your throat. And you're like, wait a second, does anybody actually even care about this thing? Or is I'm just in this weird little fucking rabbit hole because of the algorithm? So it's kind of almost hard sometimes to like determine what is the topic of the day that people are talking about, unless it's, we fucking invading Venezuela or some shit like that. But
yes, am I the only one interested in Naked Shrek?
Yeah, it's kind of like, you're like, whoa,
that,
everybody's talking about Naked Shrek. And it's like, no, I'm just kind of down a Naked Shrek rabbit hole.
I do think your theme of a lot of the work is just a kind of a melting brains and junk culture and how they mash up. You're working with AI now. Do you consider yourself critical of this kind of mass-produced junk culture, or do you consider it just a fact that you're kind of imbibing and reflecting back?
I think it's one of these things where it's not trying to necessarily be like, this is good or bad. It's more like, this is how it is, like a reflection of just like, we are living in an absolutely inundated. And if you think it's like inundated now, I mean, it's not even close to where it's going to be, because these tools are so easy to use, so readily available. We're going to be so saturated in the future, if it's even possible to be more saturated than it is now, that I think it's something that I find very interesting. And I think the AI stuff that I do and the AI stuff that I'm making is a mix of both enthusiasm and excitement around what this medium allows me to do, and also like, ooh, it's moving kind of fast. Like, this is pretty freaky. I don't see enough people who are both excited by AI and scared of AI. And that's where I am. I'm firmly in the middle there.
Is that kind of how you related to NFTs too? You found out about them relatively late. You were like a latecomer in a way. I mean, there was a scene, and then it was just a couple of months before the big sale, right? That you really looked into that medium.
Yeah, so I had a bunch of my followers kind of being like, you should check out this NFT thing. You know, this might be interesting. And I was like, this is some crypto thing. This has nothing to do with what I'm doing. I'm a digital artist. I have no idea how this crypto thing has anything to do with what I'm doing. And I kept dismissing it. And people kept bugging me. And I was like, okay, let me look again. And then it sort of like clicked that there was no real way to sort of like collect what I was doing in a way that felt native to the medium and felt like there was a consensus around it. And that's what was happening with NFTs, is there was this growing sort of like consensus that digital art has maybe more value than we've been putting it in the past. And maybe it really deserves its own full-throated category, and not just to be kind of like lumped in with mixed media and VHS tapes from the 80s or whatever. And that it really is the dominant sort of visual language of today, and that it deserves a bit more sort of like attention and value. And so I recognized that, and then really sort of like dove in, and things moved real quick from there.
That moment felt so out of control, you know?
100%.
Pandemic, digital was everything essentially. GameStop was on. You actually were pretty clear that you thought it was, I think the day after the big Christie's sale, you were like, yeah, this is a bubble, guys.
I thought it was a bubble before my thing happened. Like, as soon as I came to the space, I was like, this is a bubble, because I could see people buying things. People were buying things for like $10,000, $20,000. And I knew, because I've made digital art and I've worked as a commercial digital artist for 2 decades, I knew how long it took to make that thing. And it was like, that takes an hour. That person just looked at a tutorial. I can tell you exactly the tutorial they just copied. And then they just made the thing in the tutorial. And this person also has no background. Like, this isn't like a known artist. So this is some rando dude who made a tutorial thing and sold it to a person for $10,000. It's like, that's a bubble. That's not going to last. And then it went several levels up from there. And again, because I'd worked and been a sort of like digital artist for 20 years before that, I saw all these artists come out of the like woodwork, and it was like, whoa, guys, I've never heard of any of these people. And the collectors, because they also just came out of the woodwork, were like, they couldn't tell the difference between people who had been around for a while and people who just came out of nowhere and were like, oh, here's this thing. And I could also tell that most of the collectors did not give any actual shit about digital art. That it was just like, okay, these people are just speculating on this shit. And so it's like, I was very sure that either I was going to be a trillionaire or this was a bubble. And so it was like, well, okay, this seems like it cannot last. And like, the things that people were paying money for was like, this is so fucking stupid. There is no way this is going to like fucking stand up. It's so dumb. Like, yeah.
It was the perfect object for that moment, an easy symbol, because it is about kind of being brain fried. A lot of your images. I want to ask you about Metapurse, the group that purchased the Everydays, because they, I remember, said, we don't need a preview of Beeple's Everydays. They had purchased 20 of your works in December and packaged them together into this B20 fund that they then issued.
B20, rest in peace.
Yeah, well, is it RIP?
Yeah.
I know it went up to like $23 and then now it's like a fraction of a cent per coin. What was your relationship with them?
So Metakoven was somebody who was an early supporter of the space that I kind of saw was buying things sort of like early. And those pieces that he collected were actually in a public auction that he won those sort of like secretly over the course of the weekend. And so he was a huge sort of like collector in the space. And then obviously this B20 thing, he was moving real fast. And it was just like a few weeks. I mean, just to be quite honest, a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks after that, he's like, so I'm going to take all of these things and like lock them in a contract and then make like a token out of it. And it was like, wait, what? Like, I didn't even know this was like a thing that was even like possible. And so
I watched the clip. They used to have a YouTube clip of them trying to convince you online where I believe you literally say, my first concern is that people will hate this. And my second concern is that other artists will hate this.
And then not only did they do this, then they like did it in like 2 weeks after that. So it was just like, oh shit. Okay. Well, it's like, I mean, you own the pieces. So it's like, okay, I mean, this is happening. And I think, to my knowledge, at least, he's not sold any of those pieces. He hasn't sold any of the like coin. And so it wasn't like he made a bunch of money. 5 years in, obviously, I see this is what happens in crypto. Something comes out, everybody gets crazy excited about it. The price goes way too high, and then the price comes back down to normal or back down to like reality.
The candles.
Yeah. Now I've seen this happen literally over and over and over and over and over. So many things were happening so quickly at that time. And suddenly it was like on the phone with all these celebrities and shit, and everybody was dropping an NFT. And it's hard for me to like remember because people have hated NFTs for so long that it's hard for me to even remember that there was a time that people didn't hate NFTs. Like that was actually just a really small window where people were like, huh, what's this? And really excited about the technology. And then it very quickly turned into like, fuck this shit.
Okay, you're still at the center of this. I do want to know, do you have just a thumbnail guess or a back of the envelope guess what the ratio of sincere collectors of digital art, which I do believe exist, to total pump and dump guys is?
Very small. To be quite honest, most of those people have sort of like left the space, but it's very hard to say. 5%, I don't know. I think what makes it interesting is the fact that you can see the value of NFTs because of the kind of like transparency of the market versus with traditional art. If you go into a gallery and you spend $10,000 on something, almost instantly it is worth zero. No one will ever pay you any money for that again. You cannot sell it. Like, what are you going to put it on eBay? It's worth nothing. It's instantly worth nothing. And so the same is kind of true for NFTs. You can see that it's worth nothing. And so there's that visibility that makes it a little sort of like different. And so, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so I have to ask, you hatched this idea with Christie's to do the 5,000 day magnum opus, exposed your whole creative process over decades to scrutiny, including from me. I wrote an article. I went back and looked at all the stuff in there. And, there was stuff in there that, particularly the early period, 2007, that kind of verged from being irreverent to, I would say, like unpleasant, like
there was some dumb shit in there. There was
it's fun to draw black people.
Shit.
Yeah. So, okay, I have to ask you. People are going to want me to ask you.
No, 100%. And I think, this is a piece that is the third highest piece at auction. And what's even crazier about it is that it's a primary work. This was a work completed literally like 3 weeks before this started. This wasn't a work that was, resold multiple times and now it's worth $70 million. This was a brand new artwork that sold for $70 million. And so I think it deserves scrutiny. And I think there's dumb shit in the past that obviously in 2025 eyes is like, yeah, I wouldn't say that. I don't think I'd say that now. And so I think it's fair. And I think, yeah.
We were in a moment of sort of political upheaval at that moment. And then there's this whole Twitter politics world of kind of like dirtbag memes and stuff. And because of what you were talking about earlier about how your goal is to arrest people's attention. And to me, it seems like there is a certain politics that you see in someone like Elon Musk. Just getting attention becomes like the goal of everything. And that sort of leads you to this taboo breaking place. Is there a line for you? You're constantly trying to get a reaction. Like, how do you think about navigating the line around what gets attention, what's actually offensive, all that stuff?
100% there's a line. And there's things where I'm like, nah, I'm not going to say that. I think when people think I just say whatever, it's like, absolutely not. To me, it's like, okay, is this punching down on somebody? Is this trying to like make fun of somebody who's kind of in a sort of like weaker spot? It's the same with any sort of like comedy. That's the kind of stuff where it's just like not funny or whatever. I think there's a lot of things where people are trolling. They're making content to like piss people off. I'm 100% not making content to piss people off. I would absolutely love it if everybody liked all the things that I posted and was like, this is great, this is hilarious, this is blah, blah, blah. I get obviously that's not going to be the case. And I make fun of both sides. And one day I'm being called a libtard and the other day I'm being called a mega fucking blah, blah, blah. And so it's like I equally piss off both sides. And so I get it, but I'm not trying to piss anybody off. I'm trying to make you smile and laugh and think a little bit. And like, that's it. I think the other thing that's like maybe missed in these is, again, these are done in like 1 hour. These are sketches. Right. They might look like something that took longer because of the nature of these tools, but this wasn't something that I spent 3 weeks thinking about. It was something that I spent an hour thinking about, maybe, and then also had to produce it. And so it's sort of like they're very small sort of like things that over time sort of like give us a sense of what happened and where the state of politics and culture and XYZ is at, technology, but they're not necessarily meant to be super fully formed kind of like thoughts each.
Well, that's something I did take away from your thinking about your work and wrote about a little later is I think the everyday's form is very important. That people, particularly when NFTs burst on the scene, were really using the analogy of like owning a sculpture. And then more and more as I thought about what was going on, these are more like performances or events that are happening. That there has to be like new flows of attention constantly happening every day, at least in terms of that pure NFT form, which you kind of you're shaking your head.
Well, I think to me, I look at it more like that's just one aesthetic, and that's my aesthetic was sort of like NFTs. But I think NFTs in general are a virtual object that can be like anything. There's many people who make NFTs that are not like that at all. I mean, most people's NFTs are not like mine. And so I think there's a lot of different interesting sort of like different types of interactions with dynamic NFTs that we barely scratch the surface of. And so I really see it as like a much more blank canvas than certain aesthetics that people have latched onto and trying to be like, this is what NFTs are. Again, you can look at Bored Apes or XYZ sort of like PFP things and be like, this is what it is. And it's like, it's kind of like attaching to one type of artwork that you might not like painting wise and being like, this is what paintings are. And it's like, I think it's pretty early in the idea of a virtual object having value to sort of like lump all of it together as having one type of aesthetic or one type of like conceptual, I don't know,
idea.
Sort of like, yeah.
So you pretty quickly, though, later that year in 2021, moved into making a physical sculpture in the form of Human One. So why?
Even before that, we had made smaller sculptures, even before the Christie's auction even. And that was one of the things that also kind of like set my work apart than what other people were doing in the NFT space, is we had made these little screens that we had sold with the like work. I think you're going to continue to see this blurring of the line between digital and like physical world. You see that now. The things that happen online don't happen in a vacuum. Those things have real consequences in the physical world, and that will continue to sort of like be the case, and vice versa. And so Human One was really just a very natural kind of like, oh, now we can do this. It was just one of these things where it's like, my brother is an engineer, and a couple months before the Christie sale, he quit his job, and I was like, oh, let's build things basically like Human One. And so he assembled a team, and, he's still here, and the team's still here mostly. And so it was just a very natural kind of like progression of like, oh, now I actually have capital to be able to build this thing that probably cost $500,000 to make. Obviously, I could not do before.
I had read it as sort of almost a reaction to the NFT sense that there was an NFT bubble, that a lot of the things that people promised for that purely immaterial art, and art didn't have to take place in a space exactly anymore. I feel like you kind of immediately laid a claim to exactly those things, in opening a space yourself and starting to make these physical sculptures.
It wasn't a reaction against NFTs. It was much more just like, I don't see these rigid sort of like digital or not digital. And some people do. Some people in the space are very against any kind of physical thing, and they think it's more pure conceptually to have things that are just digital. But Human One has an NFT component. All the sculptures that we make have NFT components. The robot dogs have NFTs. And so I really don't see it as being like this or that. I personally still think we're very early in what NFTs could be. And I still think, even with all the ups and downs, that in the future, all paintings will have an NFT component, because at the end of the day, I still think if there was an infrastructure around it, it's a better certificate of authenticity. You could have the entire provenance of everybody who's owned it right there. You could have the exhibition history of it right there. It's better than a piece of paper that's just like, don't lose your little piece of paper that says you own the thing. It's like, of course it's better than that. Everybody could search it and search like, okay, I want a blue painting that's this size, blah, blah, blah. And again, does any of that infrastructure exist? Absolutely not. And in that case, an NFT would be purely a certificate of authenticity for a physical object. It's really, to me, akin to like a website. What is a website? We're 25 years into, 30 years into the internet, and we're still figuring out what a website could be, what it could sort of like do. And so I think there's many sort of like use cases. And so the physical work that I did wasn't necessarily like a rejection of the NFT stuff. It's and, not or.
In that high NFT bubble times, when I would go to NFT NYC and report on it, that was always really disorienting to me, is that on one hand, you'd have artists or art advocates, art investors talking about, wow, this is the future of art. It's like the new cubism. And then the next conference room, someone would be saying like, what if your Whirlpool dishwasher had an NFT? And it was like, I don't know. I guess that's exciting. I don't know. It seems more akin to like having a website for Whirlpool than although I think you can do dynamic things with NFTs, and maybe that's how the medium is most interestingly explored.
Well, I think there will be much more things in the future. Again, when you just pare it down to a virtual object that you have ownership to, we need the infrastructure, which has not been built. And I think will take time, because I think one of the biggest things that is a huge hurdle is just the social consensus of this. We've all grown up with, for the last, again, sort of like 30 years, that a lot of people have had computers. A file is a copy of a copy of a copy, and there's no like owning a file. It's like, what do you even mean? I don't even understand. That's a very new idea. And so it will take time for there to be social consensus around the fact that you could sort of like own something and sort of like have much more kind of like control over it. Again, I think about things like medical records. Like, how the hell is your medical record not an NFT that you can control over, and you can like say who has access to this? It's just a file in a database. You don't even know who has access to it. You have no idea what it is. You have no control over it. To me, those are the type of things. And again, are they interesting or speculative? No. It's a boring thing with this technology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have the experience of coming into the art world relatively recently, or the art industry, the museum world, what people would classically call the art world, sort of as an outsider. I'm sure you had exposure to it before. I just want to know what your
Not
impression...
much.
Not really? Really?
No.
I mean, I just want to know what your impression was. And what's your impression now? Has it changed?
100%. It's changed quite a lot. It was a very separate world. I knew nothing of museums. I did not know the difference between a gallery and a museum. Like, I thought when you say gallery, you just mean, like, I don't know, like maybe that's like a museum. I did not understand galleries sell art and museums exhibit art. That's how little I knew. Because again, I didn't go to art school. I went to school for computer science. And I was also very sort of against learning anything about art history because I was very worried that if I knew art history, that it would somehow like warp my pure sensibility of things. And that if I knew the rules, I'd like subconsciously just start following the rules. And now it's like the complete opposite, that I want to know art history because I want to not do things that have already been done before inadvertently and think I'm doing this crazy new thing. And it's like, kind of conceptually, somebody did that in the 70s. It's not that new, my guy. And so I've learned a ton. I still have a lot to learn. I naturally kind of gravitated more towards this world, to be quite honest, than a lot of the sort of like crypto world because, well, I have many differences with the traditional art world. I saw people in the traditional art world who had thought deeply and devoted their lives to art and thinking about what art could be, what art could say, the same way that I had. Versus in the crypto world, to be quite honest, I saw a lot of people who like just started giving a shit about art as soon as there was money attached to it. And they were much more interested in pushing sort of like crypto ethos than sort of like art. Again, I'm a digital artist first, and NFTs are an interesting medium, I think, in terms of selling, collecting, digital art. But I had been making digital art for 20 years before I'd ever heard of NFTs.
I feel like people are very charmed or confused by your friendship with the curator, Carolyn Christoph Bakargiev, who is a very famous curator, maybe one of the most famous curators, and very early on was touring you around the Venice Biennale and so on. What have those conversations been like? People want to know.
Yeah, it's been great. She reached out very sort of like early on after the Christie sale, and we've talked a ton ever since. And so I think I dragged her out to the United States 3 times last year for different things. She came to the studio a couple times and came out to see the dogs and stuff. She's been such a like insane wealth of knowledge that I've learned so much for. And she's just so open to like learning and wanting to understand this kind of like space and this sort of like movement in general, that it's been super sort of like inspiring to see. And so, yeah, she's been a huge supporter and just taught me an insane amount.
So I want to ask you a little bit about Beeple Studios then, which maybe reflects the kind of art scene you want to build. You constructed this space. It's a very impressive, very large space for digital art.
We got to have you down here.
Sure. It's meant as a place that is to support the whole digital art scene, as I understand it. Digital artists speak very highly of it. I was talking to somebody who had nothing but good things to say about Select Start, your project about video games. And you just did this event called Synthetic Theater that I think kind of might reflect this crossing of scenes that you're talking about, because it both had Holly Herndon, who's a very famous art world artist who experiments with AI in different ways, but also Danny McBride from Southbound and Down, and was just some sort of, as I understand it, art and technology spectacle. What are you trying to build? What are you trying to get at with something like that?
Yeah, so basically just kind of like high level, the space has a bunch of studios with woodworking and 3D printers and metal and server rooms and
like
all
a
kinds
maker
of
space?
Stuff. Yeah, kind of. It's like a maker space, but it's just for like our team. And so that's like half of the building. And then the other half of the building, there's like a white wall gallery that's like 12,000 square feet. And then there's an experiential space that's like 12,000 square feet. And so when we have events, that's where people are. And each of the events that we've done is very different and themed. And so the Synthetic Theater one was the first one where we did more of like a performance. Usually they're kind of like parties in a way where there's a bunch of different things going on throughout the night. There's drawing contests, and there's sometimes I'm doing my everydays live. We've got people painting live. We're showing a bunch of different work that we've curated from people all over the world. There's a bunch of different things. There was a video game tournament for the Select Start one. And so The synthetic theater one was more of like a theatrical performance around AI. And so we had different people using AI in sort of like live performances. We had people doing dance, and then we were kind of like using AI to project them and transform them in real time. Holly was showing what can be done with sort of like AI and music. And then we had people doing comedy and AI, and sort of we had AI that we had made, and that was also kind of like a character in the space that we would talk to. And again, it was basically using ChatGPT. And so we didn't know what it was going to say, too. So it was kind of like a live performer that we would also talk to. And then in the end, we built this short film throughout the course of the night. And then things went off the rails and robots came out and killed us. And kind of the AI sort of took over. And
good to know. That's how the night ends at Beeple Studios.
That's how the night ends. The night began, actually, I haven't said this publicly, with a bunch of people protesting outside. And so we hired 50 extras and made signs for them and shirts for them and had them protesting to kind
of
like...
They were paid protesters? They
were paid protesters, but they fooled everybody coming to the space. Like, they had to drive through this like giant crowd of people, and they were good. They were yelling at the people and stuff, and everybody 100% believed this. We also had people interrupting the show as like protesters, like protesting, because we wanted to show that side of AI, and like there is this angst around it, and there is this like fear of it, and it's like that's real, and that's real to me too, because again, working in commercials, I know a bunch of friends who like work's drying up because it's like this stuff is so fast and it's so powerful, and so it's like we wanted to reflect that aspect of AI as well. But yeah, so that was more of a theatrical performance, but we're really just trying to do different sort of like experimental things in this space that's very sort of like digital, that normally in an immersive space, it looks a certain way. You walk in and you look at it for 10 minutes, and like that's how it looks for 2 months, 3 months, 2 years, whatever. Like a Team Lab place.
It's the Japanese digital art group.
Team Lab hasn't really changed in years, honestly. Mm-hmm. And so we were trying to like, what if we did something that's much more kind of like experimental? You know, there's no tickets. All the events are free. Everything's free. Just can be kind of like an incubator for ideas that other people could use.
Well, we've talked a long time, and I haven't even really gotten to projects that got so much attention in the last couple of months. You have this AI sculpture at LACMA, Diffuse Control, and also in the Toledo Museum of Art. And you got a lot of attention for these dogs at Art Basel, Miami Beach, regular animals. These are robotic dogs with some sort of AI component, and the heads of artists, including Picasso and yourself, and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. What's the idea of that work?
So that is a new work that we first publicly showed at Art Basel. And the idea behind it is basically there's these dogs that are moving around autonomously, and they have, like you said, Zuckerberg, Bezos, Elon Musk, Warhol, Picasso, myself, and they are basically taking pictures continuously and then sort of like reimagining those pictures that they're taking in the style of each person. And then they have printers attached to them, and they kind of like squat down and like poop out a print of that picture. And so the idea behind it is that we will increasingly be seeing the world through the lens of AI. And in that way, it's a generative work because I don't know what they're going to take a picture of. I don't know how the AI is going to interpret that picture. And so it's kind of like this mix of like sculpture and sort of like a generative work. But I think with AI and robotics, sort of like higher level, you're going to see more works that feel alive. And the idea that sculptures are these sort of like static things, I think that's not going away, obviously, but I think you're also going to see things that interact with the world in ways that we can't predict. And I think we're just at the absolute beginnings of that. Another idea behind it that was a big impetus to it is that often when we talk about AI, people anthropomorphize it in a way that to me is very odd. And like people say, it doesn't have a soul. It's like, what in the fuck are you talking about? Of course it doesn't have a soul. It's a fucking computer program. Like the fact that you would even say that is actually like crazy. You're talking about it like it's a person. And so these robots that have these like human faces, like I think increasingly we are going to anthropomorphize this technology, and it's going to lead us into very weird places.
When you say it's powered by AI, what does that mean, actually? What AI?
So a couple different models. So when the robots take a picture, it uses ChatGPT to basically look at that picture and determine, is it an interesting picture? And so it filters out, if it's blurry or if it's just sort of like a picture of somebody's shoes or whatever. And so it's continually taking and scoring and ranking those pictures to sort of like decide which one's the most interesting when it comes time to poop. And then when it comes time to sort of like create the AI version of that, it uses a few different models there. Some of them use Seed Dream, which is a Chinese model. And then some of them use Google Nano Banana, which is crazy because as we were making it, just in the last 2 weeks before this happened, there was an update to the model and it got way better. We didn't have to do anything. It just looked way more like visually coherent. The Warhol ones looked way more like Warhol prints than the model we were using before. It wasn't like we did a bunch of work. It just looked way better like that. To me, that's like really exciting and like fun to sort of like play with.
Do you know the artist Mario Klingemann's artificially intelligent
100%.
critical canine? Because he also made a dog a couple years ago, an art critic dog.
Somebody showed me that
criticism.
afterwards. I didn't know that, but it's such a like cool thing, which I didn't even get a chance to talk to him about. He was at 010. He had a booth as well there. But yeah, he's great. He's definitely amazing. His Botto project is so cool. I think it's just a super, super interesting, very smart idea. And like, yeah, somebody had mentioned that afterwards. And I was like, oh, that's very cool.
It obviously really captured people's attention. His talk of the show seems to represent some sort of pivot in the tastemaker class in the art world towards technology. How do you think about the time scale of these things? Are you producing for the now, or are you thinking about something that's going to be around in 5 years, in 100 years?
Now, I'm definitely trying to think far into the future of how these things will be perceived. And that was even the impetus for calling it regular animals. That right now, this seems very weird and like, oh, what is that? In the future, it will seem regular. That it will just be like, oh, yeah, there's like a fucking dog with like a robot head walking around. You'll just see it outside. And it'll just be like, okay. You'll just see it in the wild. And so that's what I'm trying to anticipate. And it's, to be quite honest, very hard because things are moving so fast. Yeah. I mean, there's so many times where I have ideas for some AI thing and then we won't make it right away. And like a few months later, I'm just like, is this even like interesting? Like, it's like almost so easy. It's like not even like this like novel thing anymore because AI is advanced enough where it's just like, oh yeah, that's just like a normal thing. And so I'm both, again, very inspired and a bit freaked out at the pace of things.
Well, Beeple, thank you for talking to me. Thank you for revisiting all this stuff and see what you're up to next.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. We're going to have you down to the studio here.
Sure. I look forward to seeing it. That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please take a moment to rate and review the show. I really mean that. It helps other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.